In veterinary medicine, some narratives get repeated so often they start to feel like fact. But what if a few of the stories shaping our profession aren't entirely true? Today, we talk about 3 beliefs that deserve a closer look. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Addie Reinhardt.
And I'm Ginger Templeton.
We're both vets who stepped out of full-time clinical practice, but we're still deeply rooted in the profession.
And this is Out of Practice, a podcast where we talk honestly about life in and out of vet med.
This podcast is brought to you by MentorVet.
Before we begin, a quick note. This conversation briefly references mental health and suicide. If this feels like a sensitive topic for you, we encourage you to listen with care and reach out for support if needed. You can find resources in the show notes.
I think every time we start, you're laughing.
Oh, yes, because I think we do ridiculous things every time before I start. Like, you tried to start the episode before the timer was actually over. So
I'm prepared. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
not
ready to go. Yeah,
I'm
we're
ready.
excited about today's conversation. And also, fun fact for today, it's February the 4th, 2026 when we record this episode. And fun fact, our podcast is officially live out into the world today. So you can find it on
legitimate.
Spotify. You can find it on the MentorVet YouTube page. You can find it on Apple Music or whatever. So we're legit.
Apple Music?
Yeah.
But I don't know what that is.
Oh, just like a streaming service.
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, tell me more. I'm just kidding. We're not going to take up our listeners' time with me learning about Apple products. However, today's episode is brought to you by not Apple.
Brought to you by lies.
Lies we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
So this was my idea. I wanted to talk about lies and myths in the profession. And I know this is a pivot because we've been talking so much about life outside of vet med, and I'm not necessarily ready to totally stop talking about that. But I also think that right now I'm just hearing these beliefs out in our profession. And maybe it's because I just got back from VMX and maybe some of the calls that I'm taking after that. But it just hits me that there is a lot of kind of negative thinking in the profession, and it starts to become true in people's minds. And I think that's really dangerous.
Oh, yes. Yes, very dangerous. What's your first lie? I want to hear yours first because I have a couple too.
Okay, so let's do it this way. I will say a lie.
Okay.
And you haven't heard mine, I haven't heard yours. And then you give me your thoughts on the lie and vice versa. So the first lie is, well, it comes in a few flavors, but I'm going to start with the one that came up. I was on a call.
What if we have the same lies? So go ahead.
Then it's still lies.
Two people believe it. It is true. Okay, go.
So the first one came up in a call with not a coaching client, but it was sort of a coach-y type of call. And they said, no one wants to own anymore. No one wants to own practices anymore.
Ooh.
And I actually lecture on this sometimes. I will talk about this when I'm speaking. I think that's a complete myth.
Yeah. I actually know quite a few. One, let's just address, like, it is probably harder maybe that to own now than before. Maybe. I don't know. That could be also a lie. But I think there is, especially for kind of the newer generation of professionals entering the workforce, higher student debt on average than ever before. And it is hard to like start off your career with that amount of debt and then also buy a practice. And also practices are more expensive than they used to be, and might also be a lie. I'm not sure. But I think, from my perspective, the landscapes from 50 years ago has changed on who is buying practices and the kind of supply and demand of these practices. And so I think the desire, though, is still out there. And I know there's a lot of great organizations that are working on supporting private practice ownership. There's some, I think the couple International Veterinary, oh my gosh, no, I'll put them in the show notes. But there's 2 organizations, the IVPA, and then there's one other that supports like private practice ownership. So I think And honestly, like, what is it? Something like half of our industry, again, I don't remember the exact percentage, is still privately owned.
Yeah, I think it is still right around 50%. And I would say for my company, because we, moves partners with general practices, like that's the model. And so I would say with our just non-scientific data, that holds up to when I look at, is this practice corporate owned or is this practice privately owned? I think we're still right around 50%. That said, I think you said a lot of interesting things that we should pick apart.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so it's harder to own now than it was 50 years ago. Truth or lie?
Oh, for me, you're asking me?
Yeah,
It's
talk about
harder
it.
to own. Yeah, I don't know. For me, it feels like truth. But like for me personally, that feels like truth.
I am going to say I think that's a myth.
Okay.
And I think that falls into the generational myths.
Yeah.
And this kind of is one of those, right? Like no one wants to own anymore is a generational myth if you think about it, because it's a judgment about the current tier of graduates and maybe like the generation, prior. And so I do think as we talk about this, we have to talk in the context of the lies and the myths and the thinking that we assign these traits to generations, and like large groups of people. But when I think about, is it really harder to own a practice? I think the word harder matters. And when I talk to like people taking a class or coaching clients or what have you who opened a practice 30 years ago, right? Like nobody is 50 years ago that I'm talking with at this point. I mean, they worked, lived, ate, breathed, got by on nothing, didn't have, they had a huge investment relative to their income, relative to what they anticipated their guarantee, return on their practice was going to be initially, right? And I think that at the time for those individuals probably felt every bit as hard as the circumstances now. Obviously, like it's an apples to cucumbers comparison, but I think that there are the elements that were very, very hard then and are very, very hard now. I think the financial conversation we should like completely pluck out and discuss a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But I think starting a practice is very hard, period.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, and I guess that would be like, yeah, are doing like starting from scratch hospital from ground up that you're building, or are you buying a practice? I think those are two very different like questions. Is it harder to purchase this practice than it was, in this existing clientele, or is it, for in today's age, is it easier to build a practice? I don't know these answers. I'm not like well versed in this field
I have
at all.
opinions.
Yeah.
No, but I think this is perfect because like people, and I'm even doing it right now, like I'm saying my opinion as if it's fact and as if other people's opinions are somehow wrong. Like, but the problem is like when I go to a VMX, dinner and we're sitting around talking as if these things are true and nobody's being like curious and debating it, then again, like all of these, I think judgments and decisions get made as practice owners and medical directors hire people. Like I think there's just a lot of judgment and belief that's probably worth questioning. So back to your point about, is it harder to start a de novo practice versus buy a practice? I think the math is pretty clear, and I'm not an economist, but I think that the cost to purchase a practice we know is incredibly high compared to, buying into a practice 30, 40 years ago because of valuations, because of corporate interest, because of venture capital. I believe that is a demonstrable fact in the world. I'm not sure that, though, if you just had a pile of cash and you bought a practice or bought into a practice, I haven't really thought a lot about whether or not that is meaningfully easier than starting from scratch.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'd say they both have pros and
Yeah.
cons, of course. I do know a lot of my classmates who we've all been out about 10 years. The ones that are starting practices are building practices. They're not buying practices.
Yeah, because you can't.
Yeah.
And again, believe, but like the cost is just insurmountable. And you hear this all the time from people who do want to own and do want to buy in, where they are, well into the negotiation, and they learn that the person they're negotiating with, often their employer, was just going through that process, but in the background was negotiating with a corporate group, and the valuation that that corporate group is, looking at and willing to pay, the multiple on the value is so much higher than anybody can get a loan for, or anybody can foot the bill on, or, even like owner financing. And I do see practice owners out there who want to keep their practice privately owned and are willing to do some creative financing and things. But I think that that's pretty uncommon.
Okay.
I shouldn't say that's uncommon, but I
Yeah.
don't think it's the norm.
So yeah, what was the original myth?
The original myth was no one wants to own anymore. And I think
Okay.
you said, no, people want to own, but it's hard to own.
Hard. Yeah. Okay.
And then there's just the question of, that gets me into another myth, but I want to resolve this one, which is, so the people who are building their own, I think that's the way to go, right? Like, I think that's what you have to do if you really do want to own. That's a lot to take
Yeah.
on. Like, it is like you have to live it.
Yeah.
And then you have to decide, do you want to be in a partnership to help offset some of the costs and the time? But then that comes with a lot of compromise. Would you have ever thought about owning a practice?
No. I still, I know. I never wanted to. I don't know. There have been vets that I've worked for that want to own a practice. And, because I think there are a lot of independently owned hospitals out there that, they're veterinarians that care more about leaving a legacy with another veterinarian that, will be in the community and not be a corporate. And so I think there are opportunities in those places to purchase. And yeah, I think I could probably have one of those opportunities if I wanted to, but I don't know that I want that. I mean, running Mentor Vet has been hard enough. And yeah, I just think about the headache of a vet clinic. I'm like, no, thank you. No, thank you for me. Mentor Vet will be not starting any veterinary hospitals. That is for sure.
2028.
Oh, oh man.
I think then that feeds maybe into my second lie, but let's flip flop. Give me a
Okay.
lie.
Okay. So I think I was on a call the other day, and I think someone said, like, factually, like, suicide and burnout are getting worse in our profession.
Yes. I don't have this on my list. I'm so glad that you brought this up, because you and I talk about this all the time.
I know, and it's okay. So I'll stop there. So yes, the myth is the suicide rates, burnout rates are rising rapidly
In vet med.
in vet med specifically. Yes.
And Addie, so I guess our listeners maybe by now know that you and I worked very closely together, that I, for a time, was a fractional director of development, I think was my title, or learning and development or something at Mentor Vet. And, we've been very in the weeds on the research, and you, of course, are attached intimately to the, give me the title.
The Merck Animal Health Veterinary Wellbeing Study.
Merck Animal Health Veterinary Wellbeing Study. It's a mouthful. And so, but we also have just, as friends, talked so much about numbers and statistics matter. And especially in the digital age and social media. And I'm going to sound like, social media, like I'm a grandma over here. I'm not a grandma. I don't have grandchildren, just for the record. But at heart, I'm an old lady. And I think when you see these memes and posts about the suicide rate is worse in vet med than any other profession, not true, first of all. And does it matter that people understand? And I think it does on some level. And then, to your point, what you heard is that burnout is getting worse. Well-being is getting worse. Mental health in vet med is getting worse. And, suicide rates are getting worse. And we should put a trigger warning, that we're not talking in detail about suicide, but we should definitely throw a trigger warning at the beginning of this, that we're talking about this topic. And, the data, just to my understanding, do not really support that. And you can speak if you feel comfortable. I don't know, how much you want to delve into the research from Merck, but bottom line, I think as a profession, we have to acknowledge well-being matters, and that we have to acknowledge and tackle the organizational and systemic components of that and what we can do, especially like people like you and me who are in leadership roles and who do have influence and impact. And also when we are kind of spewing hyperbolic statements about the state of well-being, I think we risk creating an environment where people feel it's hopeless, not worth the time to try to reverse it, not worth the time to try to create systems that promote a better work situation. And there are probably other downsides to it as well that I'm not thinking of. I'm curious what you think the harms are of or overstating this are.
Yeah, I think you hit on most of them. I would say like fear of also like keeping people from entering our profession. I think a lot of the students hear that, burnout's inevitable and things like that. But it's really interesting because I had a social worker do kind of an externship with us at MentorVet at one point. And I had him look up the historical data on this. I was like, just dig as far back as you can on this issue. He actually found articles from, I think, the 1950s or 60s showing a slightly elevated risk of suicide. And, I think over the years, as mental health research has emerged, it's stayed pretty consistent over time. And I think the narrative that, that it's almost like a normalization that this is just how it is, and it's often, I think, came from this alarmist framing, alarmism of the issue. Like, hey, the sky's falling. Well, yeah, I mean, it is. We have challenges, and I think that this profession is a stressful profession, and burnout is slightly higher than the general population especially for some key populations. But I do think that, right, what you said is like, if we frame it as like, it's getting much, much worse, I think we risk creating a sense of helplessness around the issue, and then people don't do anything about it. But I think there's a lot that can be done. And it's funny because I brought some of these up, and I think the individual, then said, yes, well, it doesn't mean that we also don't want to change things and make it better. Like, just because it's been slightly worse doesn't mean it can't get better. I'm like, very true. So, and yeah, so I guess, burnout rates, mental health rates getting much, much worse over time is a myth according to historical research. So,
well, and I think it's also worth talking about. Two things came up for me as you were talking. One is, what do we know about the trends around burnout? You mentioned certain populations, and I think it's worth noting that earlier career vets, correct me if I'm wrong on this because you're the expert here, earlier career vets do have a higher rate of burnout and lower well-being compared to their general population. Is that true?
So yeah, well, if we look at them so vets in general have slightly higher burnout rates than the general population, and then early career vets have the highest burnout rates within the veterinary population. And I will say that veterinary technicians and assistants are also trending with the early career vets in similar values. And I will say quickly a note, mental health measures did get slightly worse during COVID times, and then started improving. So that's where we're at.
And let me clarify that, because my understanding is that correlated with the general population, that was not unique to vet med, correct?
So yeah, I would have to look at the Gen Pop data for the COVID numbers, but I'm not sure on that one.
Okay, so let's fact check, or people can just comment, right? Is that a thing? Like below and comment? I don't even know, how does this work? What are we doing? Are we on YouTube?
No, it's okay. Like click the like and subscribe. Click the little bell, and I mean on YouTube, if they're listening on YouTube, they can definitely comment if they have. Yeah,
tell me how my hair looks, and also really out of pocket today. It's been a long day, let me tell you, related to some of the things we're talking about. But I think that it does. That brings me to my second point. So identifying populations, I think, is important as my first point, especially for leadership and people who have influence, because it can be pretty tempting as a later career veterinarian, such as myself, to say, I've been in this profession, I've been working at it, like I have suffered through this, that, and the other, and dismiss the challenges that the early career vets face or ignore them. Maybe I'm not so callous, but maybe I just don't even have it on my radar. Like, oh, they're straight out of school. They should be working like all these long hours and, throwing themselves into their professional work. And I may just be blind to it. And so I think as someone in leadership and talking to my peers in leadership, especially like being on the lookout and recognizing like coming out of school with some degree of burnout, that accelerating. If you're in a part of the profession like mine, where you're dealing with specialists, coming out of residency, like really looking at those populations with compassion and awareness. And also recognizing, again, like I said before, the systemic and the organizational piece that we may have some agency, some control in. And obviously individuals have to take care of some parts of it themselves as well. Like we can't do it all. The second part, though, and I did want to mention one other group, which would be, traditionally disenfranchised communities, people of color. Do you have data around?
Yeah, on the Merck well-being study, it's hard because there's they're underrepresented groups. So in the data, they're also underrepresented. So it's sometimes hard to get those statistically significant differences because I just don't know that we have enough power in our data.
And that's fair. I love that we are doing our best to say what we know, what we think, what we believe, and recognizing that like a lot of times it's based in what data has been collected and can be collected, and we just want to be as accurate as we can be. But I definitely don't want to miss a group that might deserve focus. So I mentioned that I feel like I've heard those numbers, but it might be incorrect.
Yeah. And of course, though, you can't discount the lived experience of those individuals,
Yeah,
even
exactly.
and the amount of qualitative data. There is an article out of the UK that talks a little bit about the mental health impacts of discrimination, and so that one is definitely out there.
So acknowledging both of those things, and then what I wanted to also talk about was competitive suffering that I notice sometimes come
Okay,
up
yeah.
in this space where we have it so hard. And what I thought you were going to say that individual did in the call when you shared, some of your facts that you're aware of, I thought you were going to say they were like putting their heels in and really wanting this to be true. And it sounds like that wasn't the case, that they were really receptive and wanting to evolve.
Yeah.
I also would say that there are situations where individuals are so committed to us having it worse. And I always want to really encourage people, like if you find yourself in that mindset, what value does that serve to you, to the group that you're working with? If you really want it to be so bad for vet med, why? You're looking at me like I'm...
No, I'm just saying. I'm thinking. That's my thinking face.
Okay, we got a problem.
We got a thinking face.
And we don't... I honestly think competitive suffering is a really interesting concept. Like we could talk about completely separate from this. But again, just encouraging people, if you find yourself in that mindset of, but we do have it so bad, but it's true, but it's worse to be a veterinarian than a physician. It's worse to be a whatever than a whatever. Why? Like, why is that belief so important to you? If it is true or not true, whatever we're talking about, and what value does that serve? I think that we don't do that analysis. And I think if we did, we would recognize that many times that mindset is not fueling anything helpful or productive for us as individuals or for the group.
Yeah. It's amazing. I want to hear your second myth.
My related myth.
Because we'll have to go fast on these two.
I know we're talking a lot, and we're trying to keep these episodes not crazy long.
We could do another with myth. Well, we could revisit. Yeah, we could do part 2, but
let's just do like the rest of the podcast for eternity is about lies.
That's the new name of the podcast. Vet Med Lies. That would probably have gotten a lot more listens.
Just lying in general. So let's do one more, and then let's do a part 2.
Okay.
So, and mine is a cheat a little bit because it's so closely related to the first one, but I think it's important to talk about. And it's no one wants to work anymore. Everybody wants to be part-time. Have you heard this? I know
Yeah,
this.
no, I'm thinking I'm going through my Rolodex of data from the Merck Animal Health Veterinary Wellbeing Study. So
We don't
that's
have to have the correct answer too. Like I
yeah.
didn't intend for this to be something that was fact-based. Obviously, if we have facts, great. But I think just talking about it as a belief, whether like I don't know that the data has been considered for this. But have you heard people say this?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. I definitely heard it being said.
Do you think it's true?
Well,
Like do
I
you
just
like
wonder
Addie's opinion?
Hattie's opinion. Wait, can you say the myth again or the potential myth?
I'm going to say it the way I
Nobody.
say it when I give a talk about it.
Okay.
Kids these days,
Kids
these days don't want to work anymore. So early career vets
Yeah.
would be the implied group. But I'll be honest, like as a Gen Xer, are you a millennial?
I'm a millennial. Yes.
Okay. So I think all three groups, Gen Z, millennial, Gen X, we've all been accused of not our generation not wanting to work as hard as.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. What is? Yeah. I know that the average hours worked per week for veterinarians has decreased over time since the Merck Wellbeing studies have been around. Um, are we getting more efficient at our roles?
Absolutely.
No technology usage, but I don't know. I don't know that that's true. I have a lot of fellow classmates and other veterinarians that want to work, and this may be where your next interview will be very interesting, because I know we've got an interview coming up with somebody who's working very hard, and I think, I mean, for myself, I worked really hard to get where I'm at. It's not, I don't not want to work, but I also value having a life outside of vet med. So I think, I don't know, I think there's a difference in what can consist of like working hard. Like, and I always say I work smarter, not harder. I'm very efficient. I set boundaries with my time. I get a lot done in a short block of time because I'm very focused. And I work hard when I'm at work, just because maybe when I was working full time as a vet, I didn't do usually anything over 40 hours a week. Was I unwilling to if something dire needed to happen? No. But I tried to stay boundaried around my time so that I could show up and work hard when I was there and be efficient, have the energy to do that. But yeah, I don't know that that's true, at least with the new and recent grads that I work with. I think that what consists of working hard? Is it working 80 hours a week? If that's what working hard is, then that's definitely not what I want to do. But again, yeah, what consists of hard work?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think there are a lot of things to explore in this. And I will say my biased belief here is there might actually be some truth to this lie. And I'm more interested in the discussion, the nuance, why certain individuals may express a desire for more boundaries or less hours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's a long, long list, right? Then I'm interested in, does this generation work less and are they lazy? And I think the first thing I want to think about is the damage that is done when we assume an entire group of people,
Yeah.
a generation in this case, doesn't want to work hard. And then, that's like it or not, like whether you admit it or not, within our culture, saying somebody doesn't want to work hard carries a negative judgment. So I think all of that is important to kind of like, just let's say that. And then if the data did prove that, 80%, total made up statistic here, but 80% of graduates in, 2023 wanted to work 32 hours a week, and 80% in 1970 wanted to work, 127 hours a week. Even if that was, something that was looked at and proven, I think we have to look at what constitutes hard work, to your point. Is it length of day? Is it how hard you're working while you're working? And I think we have to look at how vet med practice has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Like the actual, like when I'm in the hospital, what I'm doing in that 10, 12, 14-hour day, what is it? And I don't have to, this is all like feelings and vibes and stories I've been told. But I think that there is a huge difference in the day-to-day, minute-to-minute experience of a veterinarian now than 50 years ago, than 20 years ago, than, and that has to be factored in.
Yeah.
I also think, I'm like writing a bunch of things as we talk. I didn't come with like this big list, I promise. We gotta look at the workforce. We've got to look at relationships and shifting gender norms and roles and all of the financial piece. And you have these, if people are in a partnered relationship, usually they're both working. How true is that 30 years ago, 50 years ago? Like, and we do have to think about, like, because 30 years ago was what, 1990? So you probably had a lot of double income families. But what were the two incomes? What were the two roles? We're both doing high level professional role. I don't know. I don't have the data, but I
Yeah.
suspect we would see a big difference there. Who was the veterinarian? We know that there has been a shift in demographics in terms of, genders and things of that nature over the years. That often is used as like a dog whistle for women don't want to work. Women just want to have babies. And that's not what I'm saying here. But as we have more women in vet med, we have to realize that we have more double income families, probably. And there's a lot of pressure that goes with that.
Yeah, well, and not just like time and household duties, and if you don't have somebody else in the household that's working, part time or no hours and staying at home and taking care of the home plus minus the kids, like it's a lot of pressure on both individuals to balance all of these competing needs. So yeah, I don't know. Oftentimes, I think the people who want to work less, it's not because they don't want to work, it's because they have they don't have many other options. I think most people who get through vet school are very hardworking individuals, high achievers, and I'll tell you, high achievers, they like to work, and I don't know. I think sometimes it arises out of, you know to even taking care of yourself sometimes can be a full-time job. Like, it's just a lot, the food and the exercising and the sleeping, and it's just becomes a whole nother job. And then throw a kid on there, or two or five.
I think you're a little bit joking about taking care of yourself being a full-time job, but one of my,
I'm actually not. It's a lot.
it is a lot. And when you look at determinants of health, social determinants of health, there's a reason that various groups of individuals are more or less at risk for certain health concerns. When you look at stressors and work demands and the ability to quote unquote take care of yourself, like, you're not talking about bubble baths and massages. You are talking about buying food, cooking food, going for a walk at the end of the day. Like, those are things that are hard to do when you're working your life away, so to speak. So I have a lot of thoughts. I could talk about this all day. But I think that this lie that I often hear in the profession, and maybe it's not a lie, but this belief,
Mhm.
I don't think it serves our profession.
Yeah.
Just say nobody wants to work anymore. Everybody wants to be part-time, even if every application that you get is asking for a part-time role.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder how we could reframe that or change that. How we're thinking about, instead of everybody doesn't want to work hard, everyone has different ideas of what their work life should be. I don't know.
Well, and as a leader in a company, like I keep saying leader, and somebody, actually, our host or our guest tomorrow, is the one who said this. They were referring to themselves as a leader, and they kind of stopped and they were like, "Leader, like, that's not a title you give yourself." And I do it all the time, and I realize now I'm like,
I'm a
yes,
leader.
I'm a leader. It sounds so
I'm a leader.
arrogant, pretentious. But I mean,
Such a
truly,
leader.
as a manager, like
Yeah.
my job title is not manager, but like essentially as somebody who manages people in roles, what can I do that allows this person to work to their fullest and contribute to what the company needs, and also respect them and consider what they need and what boundaries they deserve? And like, we can be very creative as a profession if we take the time, and if we don't just out of pocket dismiss people for having other interests, needs, outside of the work.
Yeah. Okay. Takeaways. I think my biggest one is be curious. I think first and foremost. I think oftentimes we hear things just thrown out there, and I think being curious about where that belief comes from, but also being curious about, is this actually a true statement, and not propagating things that may not actually be true. I think that's a takeaway for me. Did you have any takeaways?
I have a related takeaway, and this is something that I actually learned in coach training, which is kind of embarrassing. It feels kind of silly to say it, but this very simple coaching technique of, is it true? And you can like really get tedious with this, but asking yourself, is it true? And then answering it with a sentence, not just a yes or no. And then, is that true? Is that true? And like really not just being curious about what others are saying, but being curious about your own beliefs and assumptions, and really self-reflecting, and not just stopping at, is this true? But like, you'll notice I keep coming back to, what value does this belief serve? What damage is it doing? And so like being curious about your own beliefs, but also what different impact might you have if you had a different view of things.
Yeah. I love it. Okay.
All right,
Well,
part 2, we're going to have to come up with lies.
Yeah, we'll have more lie episodes. And yeah, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.
All right, see you next time.